Hi everyone and welcome to another video. I'm lauranemacquart and today I'm going to give you an update on my Invisible Cities project. As some of you know, this year I've been participating in the Invisible Cities project. It's a project wherein the whole group of people decide every month on a couple of countries. In the beginning of the year there were 3 a month, and now we've switched to 2 a month to make it a little bit more doable for most of us. And the idea is to immerse yourself in that country however you want by mostly reading books, but also cooking or music or whatnot. And another goal is also to do a little bit more of reading of translated. Now, my last update about Invisible Cities was, I think, for the countries of June. That was Lebanon and Mozambique. So it has been a while, but I haven't been reading that much. I've been in a little bit of reading slump, so I only actually have 2 books that I'm going to talk about today that I actually finished, and then I'm also going to talk about 2 that I didn't finish. I have also stopped making food for these countries. I don't know how I kind of fell off this wagon. Life was a little bit busy and I kind of wasn't doing that anymore. And I don't think that I will get back on that wagon, because with my current not reading that much, I'm not even sure I'm going to go back to reading books about countries every month. So let's talk about Panama first. So for Panama, I read a non-fiction called Erased: The Untold Story of the Panama Canal by Marixa Lasso, and it was fascinating. So when we talk about the Panama Canal, most of us, we read about how the Panama Canal was actually built, but there is this whole piece of history that we don't talk about that much, and that is the story of the people that were actually living in the whole area where the Panama Canal was built. Because the zone in which the Panama Canal was built was kind of taken over by America. They had this, they were allowed to do that. They were allowed to become rulers of the zone. It was kind of owned by the Americans, but in that zone there were a lot of flourishing villages and cities, and along that route, before the Panama Canal people were still traveling through that area, so there was a lot of business for the people that were living there. There were about 40,000 people living in that whole area that had jobs, that were living there for years and years and years. And when the Americans got ownership of that zone, the idea was not to displace these people. In the beginning, they needed also the people that lived there to help build the Panama Canal. But the more they advanced, the more it became clear that yes, these people would all be kicked out. And they would not be kicked out in the kindest way. Sometimes they weren't really told, or they would be told that, oh yeah, we'll transport your stuff, or you'll be able to live here and here, and that's approximately the same. It wasn't. The zones they were displaced to were not the same. They sent people to, there was also a rich culture of agriculture in that area, and that was very prevalent to the region. So when these farmers were displaced, they were put in places where the land was arid and on slopes, and they were told to do a kind of farming that was not correspondent at all to, first of all, what they had been doing for generations, and not also to the land that they had. Because the Americans that were sent to the zone to look at what kind of agriculture was there were looking for American agriculture, and the agriculture that was there they just didn't recognize as such. All this kind of stories. There was also in the book also the story of the people that tried to protest against what was happening, that were trying to tell their side of things, that they didn't need to be displaced. Some of the regions where the people had to be displaced was because the Panama Canal itself was going to be there, so there was going to be water. There's also a whole region that there is this lake that was going to flood the area, but there are also a lot of areas where this didn't happen, and these people still also had to leave and live somewhere else, because the Americans wanted this zone that they could protect, so they didn't want anybody to live in there because, oh, the Panama Canal, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it's the story of all these people that had to be displaced, and the various reasons this had to happen, and also people also on the American side of things that initially said, oh yeah, we need to displace these people, blah, 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 and then slowly realizing, wait, no, it's not necessary per se. So yeah, fascinating book, and I would definitely recommend it if you're interested in these kind of historical, untold stories of kind of alternative colonialism. I mean, this isn't really colonialism, but it's still people with power just doing what they want. So yeah, fascinating. Then we've got another book I read for Nigeria. I read Chimamanda Ngozi Adiche's Half of a Yellow Sun. I had this one on my shelf, so I was happy that I was going to pick it up because I really like this author. However, let's talk about the author first. As you might know, Chimamanda Ngozi Adiche has been, in the past couple of months, maybe a year or so, not be very transgender friendly. Chimamanda Ngozi Adiche has a history of being a feminist. She also has this book called Why We Should All Be Feminists. However, as it transpires, to her, feminism only precludes to cisgender women. And that's not something I personally agree with. It's interesting because as someone who doesn't really know a lot about this topic, sometimes when I see what she says, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But then when you read what transgender women say about the topic, you realize that Chimamanda Ngozi Adiche's comments are hurtful and are problematic. So yeah, Chimamanda Ngozi Adiche has upgraded herself to the world of problematic authors. So I was a little bit hesitant about picking up her work because I don't really want to give her that much attention. But I also think that what she says about these other topics is very interesting, and I didn't want to miss that because she has a strong voice on those fronts. So yeah, I decided to read this anyway. This is about the Biafran Wars, the Nigerian Civil War in the 1960s in Nigeria, as you may imagine. It's fiction, and we follow three characters. A houseboy called Owu, the girlfriend of the man that he's a houseboy to, who is called Olana. And Olana is a twin sister, is part of a twin, and her twin sister's boyfriend is called Richard, and we also follow him. Richard is British, and he goes to Nigeria because he wants to research these Ogu pots. At the beginning of the book, the Biafran War is not happening yet. We just get introduced to the characters and the different things that are happening in their lives. So the book isn't only about the Biafran War, it's also about their lives, it's also about marriage, it's about infidelity, it's about adoption, we could say also. There's also commentary post-colonialism with a lot of the characters being scholars and talking about their opinion about that. It talks about the role of the whites, therefore, through Richard in West Africa. And then the war starts, and that starts with the massacre of Obu people, and then we have the war itself and all that means for these very different characters. I really like this. I didn't know anything about the Nigerian Civil War, so it's always good to learn about that kind of stuff. But what I appreciated is that it's not only about the war, it also, the way the characters were impregnated into the story, the way that was all mingled, I thought was very well done. There are obviously, because it's a war, there are trigger warnings on this one. The main one that I can remember is the death of children and rape also. So yeah, as I said, I really like this one. I learned a lot. I thought it was well done. It's been a while since it's been out, so I think a lot of people have already read it, but if you haven't, and if you're interested in life in Nigeria surrounding this civil war, then yes, you will absolutely like reading this one. Then, as I said, I have two books that I DNF'd. One I think I already talked about a little bit, and that is Shadow King by Maaza Mengiste. So this was my try for Ethiopia. This one is set during the invasion of Ethiopia by Mussolini in 1935, I believe. And the point of view of the main character is this house girl, Hirut, and she works for a man called Kidane, and he plays a role in, he's part of the army that is set up by Haile Selassie to fight the invasion by the Italians. And what's interesting in this book is that it talks also about the role of women, because at one point apparently the Ethiopian men have a really hard time, and then it's the women that start playing this very important role and make sure that the war happens the way it does, which, to be honest, I don't really know the way it goes. So yeah, and it's the role of Hirut and also Kidane's wife, Aster, in that However, the reason I DNF is because the writing is not at all my thing. It was flat somehow. These characters, I mean, I love the idea of the role of women in a war like that, but somehow I didn't care for these characters at all. There was this way, my mind kept wandering off, and I even tried the audiobook, but also that didn't work. And there was also passages that it went somewhere else, so we weren't always following Hirut and the other characters surrounding her. Sometimes we went with these weird passages where we learned about Haile Selassie's doing. He was just sitting in a room getting letters and not really thinking about the war. That also really took me out of the narrative. I know a lot of people that struggled with this one. A lot of people in the Invisible Cities group, we were buddy reading this one, and a lot of people had struggled with it. But there are also people that loved the writing, and then this worked very, very well. But for me, no, unfortunately, this was a very big fat DNF. And I am planning on reading, I had even gotten it from the library, A Cutting for Stone by Abraham Verghese. But yeah, no, that was just about when my mind started going, so books weren't happening. But I am planning on reading that someday, because I think Cutting for Stone has been on my TBR for years already. I mean, my mental TBR, not my actual TBR. And then another book that I was reading and then my slumpiness started happening was my pick for Israel, and that was got it in French by Amos Oz, L'Histoire d'amour et des ténèbres. In English, that is a story of love and darkness. Is it a story? Yes, I think it's a story. So this is non-fiction, and it's actually the story of Amos Oz. It's a big book. And it's the story of how he grows up in Jerusalem in the 1940s and 1950s, and it tells the story of the whole of his family, the story of his father, his mother, his uncles, his grandfathers, I think even his great-grandparents at one point. It's very descriptive. There are points that I thought it was very difficult to get into because you have all of these. It's not at all a plot-driven book. There is literally nothing that happens. It's very much about all of these characters and the atmosphere in this Jerusalem with people that are well educated, that are scholars, all of these things. But the writing is great. I love the way once I got into it, it was very. It's like being on a river. You know, you're just flowing and it's relaxed, and it was interesting also. But yeah, at one point it was just too much for my slumpiness. I don't know if I'll get into it. To be honest, I don't think I will, because the only reason I got into it at one point, it was because I got used to the rhythm, and I don't think I'll be able to get back into the rhythm. But what I see now is that there are a lot of parts that are dog-eared, which usually means that there are passages that I really liked. So yeah, on one hand, I think it's one of those books that it's worth looking into because, you know, the rhythm is a little bit different, and it talks about this life in Jerusalem at that time. In a way, you know, you realize that this is a book that is well written, but you've got to be able to get into it. That's the only issue. And it's big, damn it. There's 850 pages. Okay, it kind of hurts me now that I've already spent this much time with this book and I'm not even halfway through. But I think that if now I tried to get back into it, I would kind of have forgotten already everything that happened beforehand. So that would also be problematic. Also, one of the topics in this one is the death of his mother. Apparently she commits suicide or dies when he's 12 years old. And that's kind of that's also a prevalent theme about him not having a mother. And but I don't think I ever got to the part where he explains how she dies. It's just, you know, something happened. Anyway, that's all for this book. So those were all of the books that I wanted to talk about. You may have noticed that I'm missing quite a lot of Invisible Cities countries. We'll see if I ever get back to that. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you've read any of these books, as always, I would love to hear from you. I'd also love to hear how you're doing with your Invisible Cities project or reading around the world or whatnot. See you in another video. Bye.